Well, good afternoon. This is Dr. Chris Lowthert, whom I'm speaking with today. Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm great, Kathleen. Good to be back.
It's great to see you. And you reminded me this is our fifth part in our series on German New Medicine. And I am delighted to welcome you again and thank you. This is Kathleen Dudley, and I'm a holistic practitioner in New Mexico. And Chris, you are a ways away in
I'm in Central Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Yeah. And I'm
beautiful,
actually a chiropractor by trade. Yep.
very fine. And Chris, you use German New Medicine as the underpinning of your chiropractic practice. And I wonder if maybe you could just explain briefly how you do that. And I don't mean to belabor it in the sense of covering things that we've done before, but someone goes to a chiropractor and then hears about German New Medicine. How in fact do you actually incorporate those two things together? Because I think of chiropractic work as an adjustment, a hands-on adjustment.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, I'd like to look at German New Medicine as a new toolbox per se. And so in this new toolbox, we have the same tools that we might have had in the old toolbox, the old paradigm of medicine, in the old paradigm of disease. But in this new toolbox, we have the tools such as chiropractic, such as acupuncture, herbalism, all these wonderful tools that through experience have helped people, has helped people and supported people in their own healing journey. So as a chiropractor, it was a process for me. Fortunately, I was only 2 years out into my clinical practice. So I wasn't fully in complete gear as a traditional chiropractor, but I was only 2 years out when German New Medicine came into my world. But it still was a process to let go of some of the old ways of thinking, let go of some of the associations we might have had, explanations we had to describe what was happening in the person's body, particularly chiropractic. It's the traditional chiropractor talks about joint alignment and subluxations and the reason why a lot of our discomfort, so to speak, with musculoskeletal complaints is due to a misalignment or a joint out of place and whatnot. But the philosophy of German New Medicine and the philosophy of chiropractic are very much aligned. D.D. Palmer and B.J. Palmer, the grandfather and the son that really brought chiropractic to the forefront, they all often talked about the innate intelligence of the body, and that chiropractic assisted in this innate intelligence and supported the body's ability to heal. So we weren't too far off as chiropractors. So now fast forward, when I'm working with patients that have musculoskeletal complaints, it's important for me to determine how it came about. Right. So we want to look at the physical injuries. Did they fall off a curb and sprain their ankle, or were they lifting something that was really heavy that they normally don't lift, and is that the reason why they sprained their back or strained their back? And then compare that to musculoskeletal complaints that just came out of the blue, right? You wake up one morning and your low back is bothering you, or your neck is bothering you. And oftentimes people think it's their bed or their pillow or the way they were sitting the day before. We have again the explanations to try to explain why we have this discomfort. But with German new medicine, this question gets answered with some work, with some uh, investigation, looking at what else was going on prior to the manifestation of the symptoms. And the symptoms typically are the body's healing symptoms. And this is one of the primary shifts in perception that German new medicine gives us, is this looking at our symptoms differently immediately, looking at the symptoms as healing symptoms, as the body's way of healing from a unexpected emotional distressful situation. And it really it could be the large things, right? It could be the big unexpected shocks, the death of a loved one or the loss of a job. But there's also these real subtle unexpected shocks that come about during our life. And it's the small ones that are really, I find, uh, they're really curious to investigate, like exploring, self-reflecting one's psyche as to, how that came about, how, for example, like low back pain. With German medicine, we describe this as a self-devaluation conflict, right? And low back pain, specifically in the lumbar spine, is feeling unsupported, not having support.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting. The little unexpected shocks come and go, and we don't really realize that it's happening, but it's after the symptoms arise that we get this ping, right? Our attention gets pinged. It's like, oh wait, and my back is a little wonky this morning, and so if you have the work, you kind of you obviously you think back as to, okay, what was happening, what changed, what shifted, what was going on in my life that shifted to bring my psyche more at ease, to allow then the body to begin to heal. And so the majority of my people that come into the office
Mm,
are already in the healing process.
mm,
And so I create an environment that is conducive to supporting that process that's already happening. But I leave out all the old explanations now. It's just, if somebody is with the low back pain, I know that have felt unsupported. So it would only make sense that I would assure them that I'm supporting them now, right?
right.
Or if it's in regards to somebody else, then, we talk about the practical application of, okay, why were you feeling unsupported? What was the context? And gently guide the patient back to that distressful situation very gently. And oftentimes they have the aha moments right on the table as we're working.
So
And
is
so,
that considered the resolution of the conflict when you gently walk them back to that and they make that connection for themselves and their psyche of that unexpected shock that then situated that pain and that essential disease within their body?
it's the resolution already came about in their own psyche because the symptoms arise after resolution.
So,
So
so we have the disease and no pain, but we have the disease situated, and it's not until the resolution happens, the resolution of the conflict, that the healing happens, and that's when the pain situates. Is that what you're saying?
what happens is we have the unexpected shock that triggers the biological program. It activates the program, and this biological program has two phases that it runs through. And oftentimes in the chiropractic world, the phase that we see often is the healing phase. They're already in the healing phase, which means they've already they've already resolved that conflict, most likely unknowingly, but instinctively, practically, things shifted for them in order for them to go into that healing phase where the discomfort, the pain, the inflammation arises, right?
So are you saying, Chris, then that the body is just that tremendously magnificent that if we just allow it, it will go through the conflict and the resolution and the healing phase essentially on its own?
Yeah, I mean, we're highly adaptable. We're highly adaptable, and if one has the disposition to self-reflect, to work through their struggles, right? To when challenges come, especially the unexpected, they navigate in a timely way, right? And oftentimes, yeah, we'll get through it, and then there's the recovery after going through whatever that may have been. And so, and then also life circumstances change, right? So with time, things typically shift, right? Relationships change, things get worked out naturally. And we often will go into the healing. And as long as there are no triggers or tracks, as we call them, that put us back on to the program, then that typically runs to the program runs to completion, and then it's all over, and the body is back to what we call normotonia, right? And so it's but oftentimes things become chronic. Things start to symptoms linger around.
And why
And
is that? Why does something become chronic then?
these are the tracks, these are the triggers. So when we experience the unexpected shock, our senses, everything is at a heightened awareness. And we remember, the subconscious mind remembers a lot of the details of that event. And so smells, tastes like food, music, perfumes, these are all time of season, the time of day. These can all potentially be tracks that reminds the psyche that there was the distressful situation at that time in association with that smell, with that cell phones. I mean, cell phones, I'm finding more and more, the cell phone itself is a track, because so many things happen now through the
Oh,
cell
wow.
phone, through texting, and
Wow.
you hear things. Just the cell phone itself can be a track or a trigger that keeps the program active.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And so anything could be a track. And so this is really this is the work. It can get challenging. And it often is challenging in the beginning to uncover these tracks that the subconscious mind hangs on to. And so one of the things, again, in shifting our perception, is that oftentimes, if you have something that's been chronic and it's been going on for years, and you identify the original unexpected shock event that happened, that triggered, that set this in motion, and you begin to put it into to perspective in linear time.
Uh-huh.
And so 5 years later, you may be in a whole different new relationship or a whole new job or living in a whole new area. And but there's triggers that are going on that keep it going for some reason. But you can basically assess, like, I'm not in a survival mode right now. There's nothing distressful that's happening right now. And so it's often the self-talk that kind of helps with neutralizing some of these tracks. Again, putting things in perspective. Like, you were in that bad relationship 5 years ago, but now it's different. You're not in that relationship. You have a better relationship.
So it's using logic.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's stepping back, as I like to call it, the anthropologist from Venus or the anthropologist from Mars, stepping back and looking at that circumstance and being logical rather than being driven by the psyche's emotional
Sure.
upheaval.
That's right. Yeah. And at the same time, knowing that that wound in the psyche
Mhm.
is still healing. It could be, it's still tender. And so
Mm.
just accepting, knowing that, not only for ourselves, we can take it a little easier on ourselves and take it easy on others, knowing that their psyche is still in the healing process, right?
So it's a very gentle medicine, German new medicine, understanding the complexity and yet also understanding our capacity to be able to heal even the most traumatic
Sure. Yeah,
of shocks.
absolutely.
And just to allow ourselves the time uh, and to not mask it with toxic drugs, but to have a respect for the body's own healing process.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed. And, going back to that toolbox analogy and the different tools, knowing that you have tools that support you, naturally speaking. It
Mhm.
support the body's healing, supports the mind, it supports the psyche, and the power of these tools now is even enhanced even more so when you know that when you're taking that elderberry syrup for that scratchy throat, that you're not taking it to get rid of a symptom, you're taking it to support the natural healing of the body. And it's that subtle shift again of intention that, again, it puts you more in line with the biological laws. And so, we have all these different remedies that we know work, and they support us. And so
Mm.
if that's if that's how you like to handle, the common flu or cold, there we go. Elderberry syrup has been a very tried and true tested remedy.
It is, and raw garlic.
The garlic too,
I
right?
reach to high heaven, but I'll tell you, it just truly shifted that right out of my body. It just helped aid whatever was there. And yes, there are so many supportive
And
methods.
yeah. And so it's not that we don't do anything with German new medicine. It's we we bring our attention, we bring our awareness to the original unexpected situation. We pay attention as to where we're at in that program. Are we still in the conflict active phase? Are we in the healing phase? If indeed we're still in the conflict active phase, then our intention then is to work on downgrading the conflict,
Mhm.
talking it over with somebody, going for a walk in the woods, whatever means that you can downgrade the conflict in order to get into a better state of mind to practically resolve it, then the healing is going to be a lot less intense. But if we have a very intense conflict, oftentimes once the resolution comes, that there's going to be an intensity of the healing symptoms also. And
Mhm.
so it's what knowing where we're at in that process, in that program,
Mhm.
and then knowing what we can do to support ourselves or others once the healing does kick in, and so it's unlimited as to what we can do, but it's free of fear. This is the kicker. This is it. There's no fear anymore. There's no fear of the symptom. There's no fear of the condition's label, the name, right? Because it's all these terms that they're 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 scary to even talk about. But in German medicine, we're not concerned as to what the diagnosis label is. We're more concerned as to what the physical symptoms are and what conflict that's associated with. Um, but yeah, you're able to navigate without the fear now. And the fear is the number one complicating factor that prevents and hinders people from healing. And we can see that you know, how Western medicine in itself is just, it's, fear all over the place. And it explains why people don't get better, particularly these chronic conditions.
Well, and if
So,
we think about fear and constriction, and
right.
when we're afraid, everything is constricted,
Yep.
and that constricts the blood flow and the nutrient flow to all the places in the body that are needing that for healing.
Yep.
And yes, I mean, when I go into a state of fear, I can feel that, and the breath becomes much more shallow, and various parts of the body respond differently, but it's not a harmonious releasing feeling. It's a very constricting
That's right.
sensation. Yeah.
Dr. Hammer has a beautiful quote in it. He said that he wants to guide us to an understanding of disease free from the fear of disease.
You
And
know,
that's
when you first taught me about German New Medicine, and the understanding that the disease is not to be afraid of, but it is to be embraced and
right.
understood as a part of the response to an unexpected shock. And then those symptoms that result are the response to the shock, and then ultimately uh, the healing process.
Right.
And that is just the antithesis of what we're taught in allopathic medicine and mainstream medicine. So to wrap our minds around this new beautiful healing methodology, we have to really immerse ourselves in just the reverse understanding of everything.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's with German New Medicine, we can spend time reading and learning, the German New Medicine, on the website, and listen to the videos and really immerse ourselves into the knowledge. But where the rubber hits the road is going to be in your experience, and it takes time. And early on, that experience can be very, very difficult. And it's going to be natural to question the validity of German New Medicine, oftentimes in these difficult situations. And so it's imperative that we're patient with ourselves, patient with the process of learning this wonderful work. In question, yes. question, be skeptical, ask the questions, reflect on maybe where things aren't lining up, right? So, um, but really ultimately it's going to be life experience that really grounds this knowledge then, and it's going through an unexpected shock, knowing what you're going through, and then watching the symptoms manifest in that unique way. It's a whole different game. It's a whole different ball game. And so, yeah, it's completely different than what we get when we get sucked into the allopathic world. And so, it's interesting because of everything that's going on right now. People are gravitating to German new medicine because it's answering the questions of why.
Mhm.
But then there's this, the whole contagion myth keeps kind of coming up, right? And so people get sick, and then all of a sudden their relatives get sick in a short period of time, and they see this and they're like, well, how is this not contagion? Why is it how is it not something being passed along? And so it's in this environment that we find ourselves in, it's very hard to step back and have a different way of thinking about how did the people get the symptoms, right? And so I think this is a big one for people that are having trouble right now with everything that's happening, explaining why they're getting sick. And so I was talking to somebody recently, and again, it's putting it into perspective. And so just hearing that you've been in contact with somebody that tested positive, that's the unexpected, that could potentially be the unexpected shock.
Or
And
that you must quarantine now for 2 weeks. That can be another unexpected shock upon the first shock.
sure, sure. And so, and again, it could be that you test positive, you hear that you're in contact with somebody and they test positive, and that could be the shock. But based on that person's disposition, again, they'd be like, okay, well, whatever. And they move on. And then within the day or two, they get the symptoms. And then the symptoms trigger another shock, because now it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then that's when they get stuck in the loop. And the fear is really at the underlying driving this.
But
And
Chris,
so,
but
mhm.
Chris, what is it? So so this is the nugget that I think is so critical for all of us to understand. We get the shock, but what is the nugget that brings about symptoms? Why does an unexpected shock have an impact on us?
Well, it's a subjective impact, right? So
Right?
we got to remember that there's a level of subjectivity here, right? That plays into the unexpected experience. So it's unexpected and it's highly subjective. And so some people perceive things differently, obviously, right? And they will manifest differently. Some people will experience the shock and it doesn't even phase them. It just kind of breezes on by, right? And these people tend to stay pretty healthy, right?
Right. But so let's look at it in this perspective. So here we are, we have this this time where it's like there's a collective illness going on. So is it you know, is it mental? Is it spiritual? I mean, you know, what is actually causing, if someone hears you've been exposed to someone with COVID, then what is it that's actually, therefore, in some people, as you say, it's subjective, causing
right?
them to develop symptoms? So what is that aspect there?
Well, we got it, the psyche has certainly been primed, right? With the propaganda that's being pushed and pushed and pushed. And so there's a priming of the psyche that is creating a vulnerability with people. And so some people are highly vulnerable to being exposed, right? And that feeds into their belief system around germ theory and contagion. And that's what sets the ball rolling, right? But
Mhm.
there's a priming of the psyche with all this information that's being pumped out there continuously. And if you have a certain symptom like loss of taste or loss of smell, this is a sign, this is a sign. And so, yeah, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that oftentimes it happens, and that's what keeps people into the loop.
So it's a mental, it's a psyche, the psyche that is responding to this. It's not, it's I mean, is that true when someone has an unexpected shock and, say, for example, they develop diabetes, or they develop um, a kidney issue? Is it the same thing? The psyche is registering it?
Yeah, it impacts the psyche first and foremost, but it plays out, the program plays out on all three levels simultaneously: the psyche, the brain, and the organ. And so, yeah, the impact occurs in the psyche first, and then the body, the brain responds. And so, depending on how the subconscious mind assesses that unexpected shock in that instant, determines which biological program is turned on in order to assist the organism, assist the person in overcoming and surviving this unexpected shock. And so it's a completely biological response. It's not just intellectual or psychological, but it's a biological response that happens to the unexpected distressful situation. And these biological programs truly are survival programs that give us the edge to survive something that we cannot prevent from happening. And how our psyches are based on our belief systems, types of religious beliefs we hold, our life experiences, how we've been raised, that all comes into play in how the psyche subjectively perceives the unexpected shock.
Mm.
And so if you are somebody that never bought into germ theory, right, and contagion, and you know that you don't get sick from other people, you don't catch
Yeah,
a symptom from somebody else, because one, first off, the symptom itself is a healing symptom,
right.
but two, you don't, it's not passed along in that way, but we can collectively experience the shock together and manifest the symptoms together. And this is what some people have a hard time figuring out, why it's happening. So why did the whole family all of a sudden get sick? Well, this is the question that needs to be asked. within the framework of German New Medicine. And if you just stay with it and look at it long enough, the answer will be revealed sooner or later. Yeah. With the family, the develop going into healing at the same time is something that isn't that far-fetched. So, you're living with people and you oftentimes the families are in sync with one another, right? And so when something unexpected happens to one of the family members, we can easily, as siblings or other family members, have the same unexpected program, unexpected distress, and then go through it similarly and then resolve it in a similar way, coming about with the same type of symptoms, coming about with the same symptoms. And so it's yeah, it starts to really looks at how connected we can be with one another, and at the same time how individual we are, in the sense that we have control over um how we are perceiving what's happening, right? We have control over how quickly we can get through the conflict active phase and find resolution and go into a healing. So there's some personal responsibility, and at the same time we share our psyches with one another.
So how about when I was a kid growing up, my mother would get the phone call from, Mrs. Thompson, and Johnny has just broken out with measles. So let's have a measles party. So all of us would get taken in, together in the car, and they drive down to Mrs. Thompson's and a whole bunch of other families, and we'd all play together. And then, numerous kids would break out in measles. And that was the way measles were dealt with. And of course, measles are not a life-threatening disease, either are chickenpox or any of these childhood diseases, so-called diseases.
Right.
But how do you explain that?
So again, there's this at the level of the psyche, right? And how the psyche is imprinted and programmed. And so, like, in this type of situation with measles or chickenpox, we're dealing with a skin issue, and it's the epidermis layer of the skin, and it's related to a separation conflict, fear of separation, wanting to separate, right? And so we can see how easily the psyche again can be primed to, if somebody has measles, you don't want to go near them, you want to stay away from them, separate from them, right? But if you find out that somebody has measles, then there's the unexpected shock, and then possibly the psyche registers that as a separation, wanting to separate, and you develop the skin condition, measles or chickenpox. Same applies. If with the measles parties or the chickenpox party, there's the priming of the psyche again, that you're going to get the chickenpox, but there's an aspect of separation there, a separation conflict that gets triggered. In this case, it's welcomed. But again, it's all the perception. It's how you perceive this. But most of the time, it's harmless.
Which would explain why some kids, even when they were exposed to Johnny, didn't get the measles and other children did.
Right.
So that subjectivity, and perhaps there was even a separation conflict of that child's having to separate from the mother on a day when they didn't want to, or weren't psychologically prepared. And had to go and spend that time with someone maybe they didn't even like to be with, or so
Absolutely.
that could set up a tract of another shock that
Sure.
and so and all kinds of expectations of the parent who wants that child there to be exposed. And so
Right.
yeah, I could see that that would have repercussions as well on the psyche.
Yep.
Most interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have another question too. This is again, this has to do with the collective illness issue, because I'm wondering, what do you think of the cult think? And what I mean of it, just in the sense that it in of itself is a manifestation of illness. To be involved in cult behavior and under the umbrella of someone who has that kind of deep, powerful impact on people, to take them away from their family, or or their country, and to become a follower. And we have so many cults. I mean, we've had the New Age with all these cults, the New Age cult leaders, and we still have them everywhere. But we've had them for many, many decades. And it's a manifestation of an illness to go into that group think, to go into that kind of cult think. How do you see that from the perspective of German New Medicine? Is that a fair question to ask?
Unfortunately, it's a lack of basic education, of basic biology, really, when it comes down to this. Um, but there's also then the gullibility of the human animal, how gullible people are and how easily duped they can be by authoritative figures, right? Um, yeah, I just really, I don't know how to bring in German New Medicine into this, but
Well, isn't it a manifestation of an illness of the mind? And German New Medicine works with the mental aspect of disease. I mean, we're seeing people who succumb to a leader type
yeah,
persona.
yeah.
And from German New Medicine, would there be maybe a shock in their own life that opened them to a psychic shock that opened them to lose their own capacity to self reflect and be
Common sense.
common sense and
Yeah,
self determination?
yeah. I think I think where this may go is into another area of German New Medicine, of what is called the constellations that Dr. Hammer found.
Oh.
And the constellations explains mental and behavior issues.
Ah.
Okay. And so a constellation, according to Dr. Hammer, is actually two or more conflict active programs. And so there's you have two active programs running simultaneously. And the moment that the second conflict is impacted, that's when it produces some type of mental or behavioral change.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. And so right now, we are witnessing a lot of flying constellations, as Dr. Hammer calls it. The flying constellation is the result of a territorial fear conflict
Uh-huh.
and a scare fright conflict. So these are two conflicts that happen that put people into this flying constellation. And the flying constellation manifests as um, people try to escape. They try to they become very ethereal. This could be where the religious cults can come in.
Oh,
They're
oh,
more susceptible to these types of figures, right? That
that's
you
fascinating.
right. But then at the same time, the flying constellation can provide uh it provides a way out for the individual. So there is a purpose for it, a purpose of getting away from whatever is scaring them existentially and putting them in a safer place.
But
It's-
isn't some of that, Chris, I mean, you could look at it as being someone who maybe doesn't have the capacity to be fluid enough to trust the process, but gets
Mhm,
stuck in a more in that ethereal escape,
mhm,
is looking for an external solution rather
mhm.
than still trusting in the internal process of the healing, because German New Medicine is all about the internal trust and the
Right.
healing, correct? Whereas the other is an external authority who's coming in and saying, look, I can help you here. You
Right.
know, let me give you the angels and everything else that are going to be the solution to everything when
Sure.
you are overwhelmed. So in part it's I mean, would you say with these two conflicts, I mean, that could be rather overwhelming, a territorial conflict and a scare fright conflict happening simultaneously. I mean, one has to do something. We're not static unless we die. So we have to go to that next step.
Right.
So if we slightly miss the step, we fall perhaps into a cult mentality where there are many that are waiting for people to comply with their cults.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we got to look at these constellations because they definitely everybody is constellated to a certain extent. We come in and out of our constellations, and so and then there's more, and there's a severity of the constellation too. So there's a gradient, mild to moderate to severe type of constellation, and so these constellations produce oftentimes self-destructive behavior,
What is a
right?
constellation? Because this is new to my knowledge of German New Medicine.
Yeah, yeah, this is a fascinating area, and it explains changes in behavior. It
Ah,
explains mental disorders, lack of focus, having a hard time focusing, or depression, mania. And so falls under the category that Dr. Hammer calls schizophrenic constellations. And there's a whole section on learninggnm.com where it gets into these different types of constellations that are linked to specific biological conflicts. And so when we have multiple conflicts, it puts us in a constellated state. And depending on the behavior that manifests, we are able to determine what constellation that we're in. And so this is this starts to explain a lot of what we're observing out there collectively.
so would you say that that could explain the propensity of people to wear these muzzles and do it en masse? Because we know that it restricts upwards a minimum of 40% of the oxygen that we breathe. I mean, that's just
Right.
standard knowledge. And yet
Yeah,
we're seeing well over a majority wearing these muzzles on their
absolutely.
faces.
Yeah, it's all fear driven, as you know. And when they're in a highly constellated state, there can be a lot of mental confusion. Is part of, it's part another constellation where people just are so confused that they can't see clearly. They just are in such a constellated state that they just have this blank look on their face, right? And they just can't follow. And again, we come in and out of these constellations, which is interesting because we all have them. It actually is it often becomes part of our personality and who we are. And some people learn to develop these constellations in a magnificent way, in a beautiful way. These are the artists, the poets, the musicians. It's, you know, everybody has their own unique constellations who gives them who they are based on what they have gone through. But it's like, I like to explain it though, it's like a double-edged sword. These constellations can be very debilitating and self-destructive, and at the same time can create and flourish, right? So again, it's this perception. How do we perceive ourselves, our constellations, and knowing how they can get out of balance and how to bring them back into balance, not getting rid of their constellations, but enhancing them and using them to our benefit to create and to manifest all kinds of feats. And so it's but yeah, unfortunately it seems like a lot of people that are just caught up in the madness are just highly constellated, and they have an inability to think clearly, to rationally think, and it's due to the continuous propaganda that's being pushed, right? And then a lack of basic education, really. Basic biology, basic science,
Well, we're seeing a real dumbing down of America and have for many, many decades. And I mean, if we just think about the importance of understanding our own psyche, Jung talked about, of course, the light and the dark, and the
Mhm.
constellation to me sounds like it's that mental side of the dark side that has potential to grow. And yet we also have that potential at the same time to use that constellation to very much learn more and free ourselves of any kind of entrapment there. Jung said that if we do not make peace with both sides of our being, we will manifest that in an outer event in the world. And I can't help but think, today we're seeing this outer manifestation as if the the loosening of the bowels of humanity are what we're seeing taking place in the world, at least those who are running this show. But then we see a lot of people going along with it and supporting it, and as if this lack of education and lack of integrity and morality is like they've gone to the fair and they've forgotten about being a responsible human being, a responsible man or woman.
Sure. Yeah.
Does any of that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a culmination of yeah, all these deviant ways, how we deviated from our true humanity, right? And steered into these cult-like minds,
This is a very this isn't really fair, but I'm going to put this out to you. Do you think this is a part of the manifestation of humans having to suffer Sophia's fall?
Ooh, that's this idea of suffering is a deep psychic implant, right? This idea that we need to suffer in order to get to the other side of it, right? To get to paradise, so to speak. Um, yeah, I don't know how to answer that in the sense of yeah, it's a good question, Kathleen.
Well, it might be one that, that we just hold for the moment and pursue
Because
next.
you're bringing in a couple different things here. You know, the whole Sophianic fallen goddess scenario and the plunge of Sophia, and then bringing in this idea of suffering, which is a Judeo-Christian mind implant. And so, yeah, I like to look at conflict as one of the driving components of evolution, right? Emergence. I like the word emergence more than evolution. And so it's conflict certainly drives the emergence of in nature, right? But then there's also mutual aid that drives emergence, and pleasure and desire is another driving component. So we have these three components that are part of life, living, part of this habitat that we find ourselves, the setting that we find ourselves in. And so it's I like to look at conflict as just it's part of life, the struggle of life. And if it doesn't kill you, what do they say? It makes you stronger, right? So it's all part of living in this habitat. And once you get a pretty solid grasp on biological conflict, then the navigation in this habitat is a little lighter to handle, right? It's little, it could be a little bit more interactive then too. And the whole, again, it's a game changer, really. So yeah, I don't like the word suffering. I like struggle. And in that struggle, that pressure actually gives us stronger, more strength. So I don't know if that answers your inquiry.
Well, it does to a certain degree. But when you say that, what comes to mind is, of course, this is a very reflective, self-reflective process. And so as long as we're willing to stay the course,
right,
and trust in our own selves and not go to that external authority for
that's right,
taking away our struggle, because as you say, struggle is a part of life and it is a part of the emergence of our development,
right.
And so that's such an important part of all of this, because German New Medicine teaches us to truly stay the course of respect of what our body does in response to the unexpected conflict.
That's right. That's right.
and stay out of fear. And so it does make us stronger. It gives us more resolve. I've experienced that on a number of occasions, most recently, and then a few years ago with, with disease, with illness. And so it's fascinating. And, I only hope that, or trust that there are many others like yourself who are doing German new medicine within their own healing practices. And I'm hoping to get closer to where you are soon to be able to take advantage of your own knowledge even more so. And I know that we're coming to a close. I wondered if you might have a closing statement for today, and then we'll see you again in part 6.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Yeah, it's about being patient with oneself, and being patient as German medicine ferments in the psyche, and just allow it to unfold in one's life through one's own experiences and the experiences of others. And as you said, just stay the course, stay within the framework that Dr. Hammer gives us. Stay within that framework, stay open to those insights, those aha moments that come about in that self-reflective process, however that may be for oneself.
Mm.
And it will certainly build. Your confidence will build with each experience, with each encounter with an unexpected distress, and with each program that comes to completion, so to speak, right? It's just continues to build and build and build. And then, like playing a guitar, it just becomes second nature,
Mhm.
right? And it's a very empowering place to be. And it's free from all the fear that's surrounding us. And it definitely, as I said before, it's a game changer in this world that we're living in right now. And so I trust more and more people will find German medicine at that right time.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's here to stay, and it's just going to develop more and more, and it'll emerge even more so than it is now already. So very thankful for Dr. Hammer and what he has given us.
Yes, and thank you for being the conduit to bring that to us. It's a real pleasure. Well, thank you, Dr. Chris Lowthert, and we will see you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kathleen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.